صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب النجاة الأمة غريب مظلوم كربلاء يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز فوزا عظيما. This night is void of darkness, despite the blanket sky, 72 surrounding one candle in the night. I feel the prostrations of devoted hearts and see angels whisper proud in flight. I hear the humming of whispered prayers, plenty of wishes, but no wish are to survive. Here we are, all 72, in the darkness, like bees, surrounding our hive. Zainab's tears have broken us and carved open the stones of our hearts. Water now flows in tandem streams, our past and future now distant apart. This earth knows only our days, while heaven knows our eternity. Death is tasted only once in life, but for Hussein, we grant it without pity. Sallallahu alayka ya mawlai wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولا تجعل يدك مغلولة إلى عنقك ولا تبسطها كل البسط فتقعد ملوما محصورا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد. In the past few nights, we have been speaking about a characteristic, which according to one narration is a defining characteristic of the Ummah, of the community of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. And that is the characteristic of altruism, or self-sacrifice, or ithar. And we are looking at this ideal in general with respect to Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam on the first night, and inshallah how it can be best applied in our communities. Since it is a characteristic, we are defined as being the people who have not even an ideal characteristic, but a real characteristic. And then last night we were looking at how this characteristic can relate to leadership or inspiringship, depending on how one wishes to see it. The question came up last night, and quite rightly so, are there cases when one should not be giving? Are there cases when what would appear on the surface to be altruistic and self-sacrificing and giving is not recommended? This is a good question. This is a question that shows critical analysis of the discussion, and I think it is important that we do raise these types of questions when we're listening to anything, really. It's very easy to say things that sound nice, like we should always be giving, we should always be charitable, we should always be kind, and yet you should always be forgiving, for example, that's another one. And then sometimes cases come to you and you think, well, wait a minute, maybe this is not actually a case for charity. Maybe forgiveness is not necessarily the best approach in this or that situation. I'm not at all saying I'm not advocating charity or forgiveness, but I am saying there are situations which I'm sure we can all think of where this approach is not necessarily going to be a lasting solution or healthy for all individuals. So I am glad that this question came up. And inshallah today I will be exploring that. What are cases of non-giving in our ahadith or in the Holy Quran? In that ayah that I just mentioned, which many, if not most of you, are familiar with, it of course advises the golden mean, that do not lock up your hands, so don't be miserly, don't keep everything to yourself, but don't extend it completely and give away everything either, that there is a certain balance in what we give. So what is this balance? Especially because, as we were discussing previously, the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi and Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, we can have another salawat. They did quite regularly, literally give away all of their wealth. Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam is particularly renowned for giving away large amounts of wealth. So when it came to material possessions, they were not the type of people to turn others away. And there may be cases when we should or should not give material things, which we will get to, inshallah. However, I would like to point to certain things the Holy Prophet and his Ahlul Bayt, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon all of them, did not give away. And one of them is something that Al-Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam is very well known for. It's something we associate with him. You can say it is a sort of flag or a banner that we associate with him. And that is dignity. He would give away money. He would even give away his life, but he did not give away his human dignity or the dignity of their message. For example, on the day of Ashura, we oftentimes recite his famous words, Al-mawtu awla min wukub al-ari wal-aru awla min dukhul al-nari, that death is better to me than disgrace, but disgrace would be better from entering into the hellfire, God forbid. So he does express his priorities, that of course it would be better to lose your dignity than to go to hell, because hell is the worst. Going to hell means that you have basically failed before Allah. However, it is better to die than to lose your dignity. And we find throughout the world, Imam Hussein alayhi salam is held up as an example of honor and dignity and the esteem of the human being and the esteem of the believer, but even the esteem of the human being in general, despite one's circumstance, whether one is rich, poor, has an official leadership position, does not have an official leadership, and so on. And this is actually to the point where it's narrated that this is inscribed on the throne of Allah Ta'ala. Now, I do not want to even speculate what it means for something to be inscribed on the throne of Allah. I will leave that to the great urafa and the great theologians to explain literally what that means in being inscribed on the throne of Allah and how it would be perceived. But in any case, it is related that when the Holy Prophet went on his Mi'raj, he saw, in whatever it means to see, that it was written on the throne that Hussein is a lantern of guidance, an ark of salvation, an imam, he is not weak, and he is a source of dignity and pride. And this, of course, is the image being given to the heavens, let alone what we would see from him here. And I think immediately many of our hearts will attach to that image, because when we are in situations where we do need to feel like we need to stand up for our dignity, to stand up for our esteem, the esteem of the human soul, and I mean rightly here, I'm not speaking about being arrogant or getting into an argument with someone, but a serious situation when your respect and dignity as a human being is being compromised. Many times we do call to mind Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He is oftentimes the one who gives us the strength to continue, especially if we are having to make sacrifices for the sake of our dignity or for the sake of our ethics and other things that we hold dear, because all of these things work together. One of the reasons Bani Adam should not commit sins, I mean, apart from the obvious that it is haram, of course, and it displeases Allah, is because it is beneath our dignity to commit sins. This is incidentally one of the ways we oftentimes don't speak with the youth. Now, maybe you do here, inshallah, but many times these points tend to get neglected. We simply say, do this, don't do this. But do we ever stop and explain to them that, for example, you should not drink because it lowers your dignity as a human being? Not only are you violating the sacred trust between you and Allah, and that Allah has created your soul, He has brought you into this world, He's given you rizq, He's given you certain advantages in life, whatever it is you happen to have, health and so forth, but also committing a sin such as drinking or other things, lying and so forth, it abases us. It abases us inside. We feel guilty, especially for some sins that are very encoded into the fitrah. We were discussing that a few months ago. So, for example, lying makes us feel bad. Stealing would make us feel bad, God forbid. But also, the outer effects of these sins also are embarrassing and demeaning. I mean, we see what happens to people who get drunk on the street, for example. You know how it feels. No, inshallah, you do not know how it feels to get caught in a lie, but it is embarrassing. It's not something you want to admit. And so all of these things are intertwined. Part of the dignity of the human being is living in a way which is closer to the angels, above the animalistic level, and in a way in which we are true to ourselves and what we know to be true. Now, I would say throughout the Shia world, and even much of the Sunni world, Imam Hussein is treated as a symbol of dignity. However, I'm going to be a bit blunt here. We unfortunately, in many ways today, are an undignified community. And maybe if I can be a bit harsh, we are a humiliated community. Now, I'm not going to say everyone. I'm not saying you personally are humiliated. Indeed, your inner nature would greatly resist that. However, there are some trends in the Ummah that are very worrying. And one of them that has come to mind recently, in fact, it's not a recent issue, it has recurred a lot over the past couple centuries, but it is coming up again in a different context, is when members of the Muslim Ummah look to others to try to solve our problems. And now I don't wish to come across as controversial here, and we can discuss these things, inshallah, but a basic value of Islam, and something I feel is very important, and also something I feel gets neglected sometimes, is we are supposed to have self-determination as an ummah. That doesn't mean we need to lord over other people. I'm not saying, God forbid, we should be terrorists or that sort of thing. But what I'm saying is, for any human being, a basic aspect of their dignity is self-definition and determining the course of their own future. Wherever they live. I'm not going to make this into an Eastern/Western issue like many people will do. They will say the problem with the Ummah is that Western culture is attacking it, or Westerners are attacking the East, or whatever. I think we're past that era nowadays, and there are plenty of Muslims living in and from the West. So splitting it along cultural lines I don't think is an effective solution. However, wherever we are, we have the basic dignity, and the Holy Prophet, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him and his family, would expect us to do this, to actually look after ourselves. And to be blunt, and I don't wish to get into a political discussion again, we do look at the most successful movements and countries in the Muslim world, the places that have actually been able to survive and succeed despite the odds. And these are the places, groups, and movements that have taken matters into their own hands, and people have sorted out their own problems, whether it's their infrastructure, their industry, the military issues, and so forth. Conversely, where you look at where foreign intervention is requested, or relied upon, or foreign investment, or foreign whatever, we do find it hasn't really provided lasting solutions. I was having a discussion with some people about the refugee crisis a few days ago. Some of you might have known where I was going with that. And there are quite a number of people you do meet within the Ummah who do feel that the UK or other countries should actually be pursuing a solution, as certain people have suggested, by actually militarily intervening and somehow solving the civil war in Syria. Because, of course, dropping more bombs on somewhere is going to end a war, doesn't it always? And so we sat down and we reflected a bit. And we actually reflected a bit on my home country, the US, and we thought about all the countries the US has military intervened in for about the past 50 years, like Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. And with one possible exception, we could not think of anywhere where that actually solved the problem. And yet, it's as if we're not learning from our immediate history. We're not talking about learning from 3,000 years ago. The Holy Quran does tell us to look at those who came before us and learn about what happened to them. I'm speaking about events that are even within our own lifetimes or the lifetimes of our parents. And nonetheless, still there is this idea, well, maybe if we try once again to have someone else solve our problems, then our problems will go away. This is an undignified solution. Imam Hussein did not go to the Persians or the Byzantines and tell them, we're having some problems in Kufa and in Sham, and someone has taken over the caliphate, and can you please take him out for us? Now, obviously that wasn't going to work. These are the examples we need to continue to have nowadays. Salawat. So dignity in general is very important. Now that was on a social political level. Of course, between individuals, it is important too. And this is something we would all agree on if I were to take a poll. Do you like it when people demean you? Do you like it when people take advantage of you or talk down to you? Even if you maybe are lacking in some way, let's be honest, we're all lacking in some ways. We don't want someone to call attention to it. For example, if I am clumsy or messy and I knock over something and make a mess in the office, I don't want someone to actually say, oh, Amina is clumsy and messy. I want someone to compliment me and say, Amina is so neat in the office, because the inner part of ourselves wants to strive for perfection, which is part of the desire of the souls who reach towards the divine. And it is actually mentioned in some ahadith that there are cases where we do have to stop ourselves from being demeaned because of the esteem of the soul. There is one narration which, unfortunately, I find it very pertinent. It's from Imam Sadiq, alayhi salam. And in it, he advises, serve your brethren in faith, your brother or sister in faith. And I want to just pause here and insert into that narration that we have really an inordinate number of ahadith, meaning we have a lot. We have a large or a good number of ahadith emphasizing the importance of serving the mu'mineen, let alone serving humanity in general. But in particular, there is a certain obligation that one believer has on another, whereby to the level that if a believer sincerely asks you to do something for them that they're in need of, or even they would just like you to do, and you are able to do it, and there aren't any extenuating circumstances, it is a sort of ethical obligation to do it. I mean, insofar as, again, there isn't some reason why it is inadvisable. So, for example, if someone wants to sit in your seat on the bus, and in particular this would be like the mu'mineen, but it is a good ethical value to have in general, and there's no particular reason why you can't or shouldn't give up your seat, and they're not being overbearing. There is a sort of ethical obligation to take care, or to do that, and to honor their request, let alone all of the requests we make of each other in the community. Now, I know sometimes we do not like it when people ask us to do things, and I do sometimes need to turn off that part of me that objects when someone tells me, sit here, sit there, I want to sit here, get me some water, etc. But the point being, it is emphasized a lot that we should... basically, the believer obeys the believer, insofar there is humility and a good mutual good intention and so far there. However, this narration says, serve your brethren in faith. However, if they start treating you like a servant or using you, it says istakhdamak. So if they are using you like a slave or a khadim, then stop serving them. So I think that really encapsulates everything there, insofar as people are either on good terms or on neutral terms, or if they're on bad terms, it's not because of what they're asking each other to do, then we are obligated to serve each other, and it is an honor. But if they start treating you like your slave, taking advantage of you, using you, then there's no more ethical merit in continuing to obey them just because they want you to do something. That at that point, you are allowing it to be a bit more of an unbalanced, I don't want to say oppressive, it could be oppressive, at the very least unbalanced relationship, and you are not protecting your dignity. So this is one of the pieces of advice that has come to us from the Imams, peace be upon them. Another narration which you may be familiar with, attributed to Imam Ali, alayhi salam, is that obviously one should not be arrogant. It is a highly condemned ethical trait. May Allah remove it from all of us, myself first. However, if you are standing before someone who is arrogant, the way you repel that is through a sort of arrogance. I mean, obviously you don't want to really be arrogant inside yourself, but you do have to stand up in front of them. As we would say, stand up for yourself. So for example, Imam Sajjad, alayhi salam, when he's speaking to Yazid, he doesn't cower. That's not his place to have excessive humility and everyone has a greater right than me and I will give everything to you. No, he emphasizes who he is, what his merits are. why he has a right to a certain position that Yazid does not have, and so on and so forth, because he is standing before the arrogant, so he stands firmly in front of him. So this is another useful piece of advice for general life. And again, it does not mean to be arrogant. There are some people, unfortunately, who take this narration a bit too far and they say, no, Imam Ali told me I should be arrogant. No, if you're finding you're getting into a lot of arguments with people and your temper is flaring and so forth, then maybe you might not be interpreting this narration in its best way. But conversely, there are plenty of us who will not necessarily stand up for ourselves because we feel it is unethical. So, for example, someone is being demeaning to us and we feel like we have to continue to be humble all the time because the Holy Prophet was humble. There is a sort of happy medium. So this is another way in which we should not give up our dignity. Dignity is priceless. However, I did mention we were going to speak about things that do have a price. Now, in general, charity is good, and gifts are good. Gifts are also recommended, loans are recommended, waqf is recommended. There are many, many ways in which we are encouraged to part with our material wealth for many reasons, not the least because it not only benefits others, but it benefits ourselves, right? How does it benefit ourselves to give up our wealth? It reduces our attachment to the life of this world. It makes us better people. Again, it helps us take on a divine attribute, the attribute of giving, which is an attribute of Allah Ta'ala. And it is narrated, if we are thinking to this next stage in our lives, that one of the ways to lessen one's fear of death is to send one's wealth ahead to the next world. Because as human beings, we tend to be quite attached to things. So, for example, I might be attached to my phone or my laptop and so on and so forth. However, if we take the things that we are attached to and send them to the next world, and of course you don't literally package up your laptop and send it to the barzakh, you give it your things in charity or to those who need them or who would benefit from them, then you'll be more willing to follow. That's some advice that is given to us anyway. However, there are some situations when charity is not recommended. One situation, of course, is simply when one is giving to the point where one can no longer survive. So that is to say, for example, it's narrated from Imam al-Qasim, alayhi salam, that if you give charity to the point that you yourself are suffering, then this is something that you are doing incorrectly. That, of course, there are times when you should give and have nothing, like the example in Surah Al-Dahr. But if in general you're not able to handle life because you have given so much, then you become a burden on society. And you're not able to fulfill the responsibilities that you have in society. So there is a sort of middle ground. I will say in general, I do think excessive generosity is usually less common than miserliness. But perhaps you have met people who do suffer from the other side, who, for example, they don't have enough income to take care of themselves, but they give lavishly to other people. Or maybe they don't have enough money for basic things for their families or medicine or these things, and they're still giving lavishly to other people. The latter, of course, is particularly condemned because one's financial dependents have a right on a person. For example, children. They have a certain right to be taken care of at a basic standard when they are not an age that they can take care of themselves. It used to be that women were typically financially dependent. Nowadays, of course, there's a bit more variety in that. But insofar as a woman is a financial dependent, she also has a right to have a decent life. And some of these narrations, of course, are mentioned with the paradigm in mind that it is the man who's earning the money and the women and children are all dependents. There are narrations, for instance, condemning a man who did not, even with respect, for forgetting about charity for a moment, even a man who has a certain type of food but does not share it with his family. So the idea being he has one thing and he leaves his dependents to do something else. That actually came to mind, unfortunately, because of someone I do know personally. It's been a while, I suppose I can mention this, but I did know of a family situation where the woman was expected to stay at home with the children and they were given a very small amount of money. And then the man would go to these restaurants and have these lavish meals, quite frequently, while the women and the children were literally counting their food, trying to eat less in order to make the money stretch. And eventually someone had to come talk to them and say, wait a minute, this is not what you do. You don't go have your chedo kebab and everything while your wife and your children are counting their lentils and so forth. This is not ethically right. Now, inshallah, this is not happening here. But the point is, even this sort of imbalance in the family is not allowed. And so it's not charitable if you take the basic needs away from your dependents, whether they're wife, your children. I'd like to be equal opportunity today. I mean, sometimes it is the woman who's the bigger income earner, or if you're taking care of your parents or your relatives or whoever it happens to be. It's not praiseworthy before Allah to take away what they need without their permission to give it away. Now, if they allow it, it's something else. So, for example, in the story of Surah Al-Dahr, it's not like Imam Ali went to Hazrat Fatima and just took her food and the children. No, what makes the story moving is that they all gave it. So if someone gives it, that's different. But we shouldn't be taking away from each other. I would like to mention something else specifically. And this is also a sort of family/gender-related issue. And this is not as much of a material issue, although it is sometimes a material issue. And that is, it does seem to be cross-culturally in many cultures. I'm not sure about all, but in many cultures, men and women are socialized differently in a certain way. And I think sometimes we don't call attention to this as much as we should. And that is, generally speaking, from my experience, men are socialized to be realistic about their capacities. So if someone says, for example, Brother Amir, I need you to work 18 hours a day for the next year and you're not going to get any extra pay, and by the way, we're going to reduce your salary or something, he's been socialized. Now, I don't know what he would or would not say, but generally speaking, there's an expectation that men can and will draw the line and say, no, I'm sorry, this is not fair, this is not something I can do, I have other commitments, I will work my set number of hours for the fixed salary and do my normal work. And this is agreed upon. There isn't. It's less likely that men are going to have a guilt complex and the inner voices in their head saying that really you shouldn't have said no, that was so bad, you should go back and say yes. Women in general, we tend to be socialized different. It is generally very bad to say no to a request, even if we're completely overstressed, overworked, having some sort of breakdown, caring for children, caring for parents, caring for spouses. And generally, the first person who tends to get sacrificed among women is ourselves. We know a lot of women who, for example, their health declines or they have other problems simply because we feel that we have to sacrifice all of ourselves for everyone else all the time. And this may be an external pressure. There may be people around us expecting that. It also may be an internal pressure. It may be that no one would mind if we said, well, I understand, for example, you need me to do this or that, but I can't do it because I have this or that responsibility. It may be there would be no problem with that in society, but we're raised to feel very uncomfortable with that. So this is an area where I do think there is a bit of gender imbalance with respect to our perspectives of when it is necessary to be selfless and when it is acceptable to take care of our own basic needs, like our health, mental stability, well-being, and so forth, let alone other issues in life. And so there may be some issues along these lines where it might not necessarily be the right decision to push people always to be selfless and give more, because, I mean, this also is cliche, but if you give to the point that you can no longer keep giving, then you're not going to be able to benefit everyone or anyone at all. That you need to be in a good condition yourself in order to serve your family or serve society or serve the workplace and so forth the best. That was a bit of a side note, but it does come up very frequently. And it comes up throughout life. I mean, you see women at an older age who are struggling with these issues, struggling to say no to excessive requests and so forth. Okay, so that was about when being selfless is and is not advised and in what ways. There is something else we are also advised. By the way, the title Islamic Selfishness was obviously not meant to be taken fully literally. Islam does not encourage us to be selfish, but it's just to get us thinking about the idea and what we consider selfish and so forth. Is it really genuinely selfish, or is it just preserving one's dignity, well-being, and so forth? So apart from the great advantages, or I should say the great merits of giving, and just as a side note, I wanted to add that one of the sisters, Sister Zahra, was speaking to me afterwards the other day and pointed out the selection by Khalil Gibran about giving. You may be familiar with him. He was a poet and author who, he was not Muslim, but a lot of times when people are expressing the greater human truths, what they say is really quite similar across religious traditions. He was Christian. And it was interesting to see how much the ideas about giving he was expressing in the poem related to some of the ahadith we were discussing, or that I had in mind too when I was speaking. So, one of the things, for example, it said is, do you only give to the worthy? Would a tree say that, or an orchard? I mean, I'm paraphrasing, it's poetry. They give so they can have life. And anyway, it's a very moving excerpt to read. I mean, nowadays, mashallah, you could even look it up before going home. You can look up Khalil Gibran and giving. It's public domain. You can read it. I wanted to mention it yesterday, but it slipped my mind. Okay, so there are many merits to giving. However, it is also mustahab to accept gifts. Accepting is also religiously recommended. And again, we tend to fall into two categories, although I'm not sure this is a gender division. It may just be a personality division. There are some people who are better at giving but not so good at receiving, and vice versa. We don't always have both characteristics together. It takes a certain amount of generosity and openness to receive gifts as well. And when we look at Ahlul Bayt, alayhim as-salam, we found that just as they were very open-handed in giving, they also accepted what was given to them, no matter what. Now, of course, this doesn't get to the situation we were discussing yesterday where someone is using their position to accept gifts or acquire wealth. There may be cases where you draw the line and say, I cannot accept a gift, like a bribe, for example, if it would come across as that way, or favoritism, and so on and so forth. So I'm not talking about cases where there's a clear ethical or legal issue, but in general, everyday life. For example, it's narrated from the Holy Prophet ﷺ that one of the ways a Muslim honors their brother, or one could extend that to sister in faith, is through accepting the gift they want to give them. And it's related from Imam Hussein ﷺ that when you do that, you are helping them in their generosity. That is to say, you are allowing them to enjoy the feeling of generosity, because it is something we like. We do feel good when we give someone something, whether it's charity or just simply a gift. And also you're enabling them to come closer to Allah. You're enabling them to earn thawab. So we are helping them come closer to Allah. Now, of course, we shouldn't take that to an extreme. I mean, there are people who will twist these things around. But as a general principle, it is good ethics to accept things that are offered to us. And it's related that once someone gave something to one of the wives of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, and the lady was quite poor. And so this particular wife of the Holy Prophet refused to accept it because she felt, I can't really take anything from this lady. This may have happened to us at some times in life. Maybe someone who is really in a bad situation gives us something. I remember in the very brief time I lived in Sayyidah Zainab, I knew a number of women who were refugees there. And, again, they just... when you come as a refugee to another country, generally you don't tend to have a lot, and a lot of them were really living in difficult circumstances. And when I finally went off to Iran from there, a bunch of them got together and they gave me the money that they had. And I wasn't quite sure what to do because, at the end of the day, my situation is better than theirs. And I'm not in a refugee situation, and so on and so forth. And many of these people, alhamdulillah, have gone home now. But on the other hand, it's not polite to refuse. And finally, this lady came up to me and she's like, don't say no, don't say no. So I just took it. And then, that was that. I mean, it wasn't a lot of money, but it's just I felt embarrassed to be taking money from people who were very clearly much worse off than I was. But anyway, this is... alhamdulillah, we do have a lot of generosity in our community. And I think that's one of the things that's also come up with the refugee situation as well nowadays, that many people who visit places like Syria or some other countries where some of these refugees are coming from will comment on how hospitable and generous and giving people tend to be and have treated them. And unfortunately, when it's the other way around, when some people come here or to other places, such as Hungary, unfortunately, they aren't always met with the same thing, which is quite sad. In any case, so this wife of the Holy Prophet refused to accept the gift, and the Holy Prophet, he explained to her that this was a wrong action, and he said that this is a way that you have humiliated her. She's basically put herself on the line, offered you this gift. Maybe it was all she had to offer, and she's gone through that effort, and you have rejected it. This is actually something that it's removing her dignity. And then he, sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, he gave the suggestion that you could have accepted it, take it gracefully, and then sometime in the future give her something else. Not that it looks right away like I'm giving this back to you. For example, there's a story about Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, that once he passed by a bunch of extremely poor people sitting in front of Masjid al-Nabawi, because there was an area in front of Masjid al-Nabawi where basically what we would call today homeless people used to sit. So people who didn't really have families or anywhere to go, they would just congregate there, and they tended to be quite poor. So someone saw him riding by on his horse, said, Assalamu alayka ya ibn Rasulullah, and invited him to come and share their food, which was really, very little, not much, and not very good quality. So what does Imam Hassan do? Should he accept this? I mean, if you see a man, for example, I don't know, maybe living in a park somewhere in London, just to make this a little bit more contemporary, and maybe they've got a slice of pizza, and this is all the food they've had all day, and then they come and offer you to share their slice of pizza, which is not even to the level of this narration. I mean, their food was very, very simple at the time. Would you want to take it? You'd feel like, well, I really don't want to take the food from this person, let alone, let's be honest, a lot of times we have resistance to sitting down with people we don't know in these situations. So Imam Hassan, alayhi salam, what he does is he gets down from his horse, so he does have the humility to not sit there and converse about this while he's sitting on his riding animal and they're on the ground. He gets down, he thanks them for the invitation, he sits with these people and shares their very small amount of food with them. And then he said, now that I have accepted your invitation, you have to accept my invitation. So he invited all of them to come to his house, and he and his wife provided them food and then provided them a lot of money. And they went away in a much better condition, simply due to asking Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam to join them and asking with sincerity. So this is not only showing the merit of giving, but also how, religiously speaking, it is encouraged that we accept things that are offered to us, unless, again, there are higher circumstances. And of course, one of the highest levels of giving we do see in the story of Imam Hussein alayhi salam is the absolute giving of the shuhada in Karbala, the companions of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. As the poet was saying, plenty of wishes, but no wish are to survive. Here we are, all 72 in the darkness, like bees surrounding our hive. While heaven knows our eternity, death is tasted only once in life, but for Hussein we grant it without pity. By the way, these are some poems from Brother Tahir Adil, who's put online a series about 12 companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. But if we think about the absolute way these companions were willing to give their lives on the day of Ashura, and there were families whose entire lineages were wiped out on that day. The family of Aqil, for example. That was the end of the family of Aqil. We were speaking about Muslim ibn Aqil last night. And yet they were all willing to sacrifice. They didn't say, let us just leave one or two so at least our family name or our wealth and so on can go on, even in a society where this was very important. And I think this is an ideal example because when we see someone facing martyrdom, facing shahada, or facing jihad, if you will, there are basically two things going on. One is that they are making the absolute sacrifice. They're saying, this life that Allah has entrusted to me, I will place in His hands for a higher cause. So they're giving the closest thing they have to them. While at the same time, they're also drawing the line because people only go to jihad, and I mean real jihad, not the way we use that casually, when they are trying to stop something worse from happening, right? So someone comes and invades your country, you might do a jihad to stop them from doing that, like has been happening in Iraq, for example, the past year or so. It's a case where it's not time for altruism anymore. You stop the invaders. You stop the people who are threatening people's lives. You stop the people who are threatening people's human honor, and so forth. And so we do see both in this. But definitely one of the most inspiring things about these companions was how willing they were to give their lives. Muslim Ibn Osajah, for example, could we leave you alone? How could we excuse ourselves before Allah if we did not fulfill our duty to you? By Allah, if I knew I would die and then be brought back to life and then burnt and brought back to life again and scattered, and that would be done to me not once, not only once would I go through that pain, but 70 times, I would never leave you until I passed away and met my death fighting on your behalf. So how could I not do this when I'm only going to die one time? And then after that, I will be able to be experiencing great blessings from Allah. Indeed, Zainab's tears have broken us and carved open the stones of our hearts. Water now flows in tandem streams, our past and future now distant apart. This earth knows only our days, while heaven knows our eternity. Death is tasted only once in life, but for Hussein, we grant it without pity. وآخر دعوانا عن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.